Wonderful. Great. Well, hello and welcome to our Apex Social Host Family event. My name is Sarah Kadinsky, and I'm the Executive Vice President at Apex Social. Along with leading our global organization, I also lead our Apex Care and Development team. They are a team of amazing women who provide personalized support to all of our host families and care professionals. And together with them, we want to welcome you to our host family event. I want to thank you all for joining us today to talk about creating success from the inside out. I'm personally very excited about this topic. I've been talking with Cindy this week, and I'm just really looking forward to what she has to share. So on that note, we are honored to have our special guest speaker, Cindy Kaplan, with us today. I have known Cindy since 2014 when she hired her first Apex Care professional. She was always a fantastic host mom who really invested in her caregivers and had a great way of partnering with them for her family's success. And so Cindy is a mother to 3 children, one of whom was born with cerebral palsy and has significant special needs. She's very well accomplished and has received a conscious parenting coach certification. She's a parent coach with the Parent Coaching Institute. Her work focuses on mapping patterns that block growth and connection in parent-child relationships, creating bridges from a parent's past to the present, educating clients on core parental competencies, sounds awesome, and empowering clients to create their own change and transformation, which I really love. Cindy's also earned a master's degree in psychology and drama therapy and has completed post-grad studies in family and couples therapy. So really excited to just hear from her and her experience and her learning. But before we hear from Cindy, I just wanted to mention a couple of housekeeping things. It's great to have you all here. I'd love if you take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat, say where you're from. That will be wonderful. And we will be using the chat. We will have time for questions. And so as you have questions, please feel free to add them in the chat, or you can message me directly if you'd rather keep it more anonymous, and I can pose the question for you. I will moderate the chat, and I will make sure we get to your questions at the appropriate time. So please feel free to chime in there, and also you can just share thoughts there if you'd like. But now, without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Cindy, who's going to be our main speaker here. So thanks for joining us, Cindy.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm excited to be here. I'm honored to be here. And I want to just extend thanks to you and to Susan for providing amazing professional, they were au pairs at that time, but I know the name has changed, childcare professionals who were life-changing for us. And I want to also say that, like, the timing for talking about success from the inside out is so relevant even at this moment, because while I'm speaking to you, my 21-year-old daughter, Mira, is in the hospital. Well, she was recovering from surgery, came home, and is now back for some other complications. Hopefully she'll come home in the next day or two. So I say that because I live and breathe the complexities of raising a child with special needs. I get the complexities and the benefits of having someone live in our house, which is both a blessing and is tricky to navigate. And I think for all of us raising kids with special needs, there is a level of responsibility that I think goes above and beyond parents of neurotypical kids, some of which we make more complicated for ourselves, and some of it is just more complicated in the, I would say, mostly in the doing. Obviously, some of it we can't shift. There are certain things that come with having a child that has unique needs that requires more. And then I think the reason that I love the title of this talk so much is because we have within ourselves the ability to find alternative ways of being and ways of showing up for ourselves and therefore for our children. So, and anybody else who's living in our house, a childcare professional, partner, other children, the siblings, anyone else in our lives, the way that we show up for ourselves is going to have a direct impact on those around us. So I want to talk about the ways in which we can create success within ourselves first. And I also will address just even some of the complications and ways to have success in the relationship that we have with a childcare professional living with us.
That would be great.
So, and as Sarah mentioned, please, if you have questions, there will be time after a while to ask any questions. But if something comes up along the way, if what I'm talking about isn't clear, if you have a question about that specifically, please put that in the chat and Sarah will try to catch those. And I will pause several times throughout my speaking so that we can address those. And so anyway, I say that because I know that our worlds are complicated. Our worlds are complex. We all know, because we've heard it so many times, how important taking care of ourselves is. And we know it up here, but in the act of doing so, it's one of the first things to go. So I'm hoping, and I will tell you flat out, that what you're not going to leave with today is different ways to get out and, you know, find some luxurious ways of taking care of ourselves. Because sometimes for many of us, some of those aren't even a possibility, right? There is no, and let me say, there is nothing wrong with going. There's beautiful things about going to the gym or in the physical world of self-care, whether it's going to get a massage or fill in the blank. Those are all lovely and they feel good, but they feel good externally and it's not so long lasting. So I want to start with something that I have found to be my greatest tool for self-care. And I want to share it with you, but also please know that you already have this within your toolbox, and that is simply your breath. So what I would like to do before we even get into the nitty-gritty and talk about other things, I would love to just center us with our breath. And then I'm going to ask you to come up with an intention. And there's a reason that I'm going to ask you to create an intention. I'm going to ask you to come up with an intention that you want to have for yourself during this next 50 minutes that we're together, something that you wish to leave with, because I also know that the fact that you have chosen to set this hour aside for you, for your kids, for your caregiver, I want you to leave feeling like you have gotten something out of it. So what I'd like to ask you to do, if you're comfortable, just gently close your eyes. If it doesn't feel right to you, absolutely no pressure. If it feels right to you, gently close your eyes. And all I'm asking you to do, this is nothing to woo-woo. I'm not asking for anything crazy. I want you to just find your breath. If it feels right to you, you can place your hand on your heart. Just close your eyes. And maybe first, if it's hard to even know what I mean by saying find your breath, first, just allow yourself to feel where you have physical support right now. Feel where your feet meet the floor. Feel where your feet are dropping into the floor and where the floor is there to support you. Feel where the back of your legs rest on whatever you're sitting on, chair, couch, bed, floor. Feel that point where the ground or the couch or the chair is there supporting you and where your body is dropping in. And from there, see if you can find your breath. Just notice your inhale and your exhale. And with each inhale and exhale, see if you can move away from the outer world and everything that has happened in your day up until this moment, and begin to move more into your internal world. And just notice and see and witness the rise and fall of your breath, of your chest and your belly with each breath. And then I want to share something that was the most profound thing I heard about my daughter many years ago. And that is that I was told when she was about 2.5, that every single child, despite any physical, cognitive, emotional challenges, is a complete, intact soul. And therefore, there is nothing in our children that needs to be fixed. And if that's the case with our children, then it also has to be true for us. So in my speaking to you today, I want you also to really, really grab hold of this idea that there is nothing to fix within you, your child, or the professional who may be living with you in helping. So with that in mind, if an intention bubbles up for you, something you want clarity on, something you want to leave with, something in the way that you want to show up, just allow that to bubble up. And then whenever you're ready, gently open your eyes. And if so moved, just write that intention in the chat, and then we will move forward. And while people may be writing your intention in the chat, I just want to share just a brief reason as to why I chose to open that way. And that is to know that our breath is always accessible to us. Always, always, always. And so in those moments where we can't take a break, or our kids are doing something, if they're nonverbal and the whining is nonstop, if there's behavior that's driving us crazy, the best tool we have is our breath. And to notice how you feel even after that brief couple of moments, couple of minutes of centering and breath, to notice how that grounds us, because it takes us out of the future, it takes us out of the past and brings us directly into the present moment. So just know that that is always there. And when nothing else, you have the ability to just tune into your breath, to bring yourself back to the here and now. And secondly, the reason I asked you to come up with an intention is because so often, and in a way that is so understandable, we have incredible expectations that we place on ourselves, on our kids, on the childcare professionals that live with us, on our partners. And so I want to focus today on the things that get in our way of feeling that sense of success. And expectations is one of those things. And it leads us to then be reactive. So imagine what it would be like if, when we start, whether it's a conversation with a childcare professional, whether it's a conversation with our child, or whether it's even a conversation with ourselves at the start of a day, to come up with an intention in terms of how we want to show up. Because I can tell you, when I set an intention for my day, what it actually does is it automatically brings us to a level of consciousness that is different from where we were steeped in momentarily. And so being able to come up with, if we're just going to the childcare professional side, if there's something that's causing tense interactions or frustrations in our home, and we decide to have a conversation, setting an intention for how we want to show up or what we want to happen from that conversation is huge. And I do this, I try my best to do this before I have a conversation with my kid. If there's something, whether it's talking about too much screen time, whether it's, I will say, I even do it when I'm having a conversation with Mira, despite maybe her inability to understand in the same way, or her inability to converse with me. Setting my intention in terms of how I want to show up is huge. And the way that I want to show up for her as I go to visit her in the hospital, and I want nothing more than to just like shake her and say, you need to drink. If you want to go home, you have to start drinking on your own. And know, because I know that the way that I show up is going to immediately have an impact on her. And so actually that just reminds me, the week that she was home in between her recovery from a spinal fusion, she wasn't eating. And I had my mother-in-law who was there and with the best of intentions, wanting to help Mira eat. So the two of us were there sitting at the table feeding Mira. And her approach, and again, I understand it. She was saying to Mira, Mira, come on, Mira, you've got to eat. Mira, do it for Nona. Do it for your Nona. Come on, please eat, Mira. You've got to eat. Do it for me. And I'm watching this and I didn't want to interrupt her, but all I could think of was her anxiety around Mira eating and her pleading with Mira, whether Mira, she couldn't respond to her, but all I could sense was the energy coming from her about the need to please Nona and the anxiety around it that I knew wasn't going to help her. So what I was trying my best to do is believing that Mira's body is going to show up and do what it needs to do and remain as neutral as possible, but saying, this is here. It's really important that you eat. You need it for your body to heal. I can't make her eat. And the more anxiety I felt, know full well, because every single kid know, again, regardless of whatever needs they have, they pick up on our energy. So if I remain neutral and caring and connected, that is going to better enable Mira to do what she needs to do. So let me stop even just for a moment. Any questions so far? And let me just see what the intentions are here, to be fully engaged in the present moment and to offer grace to them and to myself as we navigate whatever the day holds. Yes. Yeah, beautiful. Because we can't control what happens externally. We can only control the way that we decide to show up. My intention is to 100% believe that I already have everything I need inside in order to be the best mother, sister, daughter, friend, neighbor, coworker, employee, etc., that I can. Yes. And that is so huge. And so to know that about ourselves and to know that about our children is like, if that's what you can leave with and believe that, phenomenal. To be a better role model and stay calm in stressful situations. Yes. And that is easier said than done. So what I'm hoping we get to hear is how we get to that place of calm. How can we do that? Because what often happens if we say we want to be calm and then in that moment we're not calm, what do? We judge ourselves. And I know that we as parents can be our biggest critic, and certainly as we parent children with special needs or who are outside the world of typical, I have never met a population who is harsher on themselves than us. We have such high expectations of ourselves, and it's so important to begin to deconstruct where those beliefs come from, decide how and what we're willing to let go of, and to be able to look at our children and be able to discern what it is that we think they need versus what they truly need. Because what I can tell you from raising 3 children, my youngest is 15. I didn't even say, so Mira has cerebral palsy, and she, and I'll get to this point. No, I'm not going to say I'm embarrassed to say, because it just is what it is. It's only in the last 6 months that I catch myself when describing her, because for 21 years, when I would say my daughter has cerebral palsy, the next 2 sentences out of my mouth would be, she's nonverbal, she's non-mobile, and she requires assistance for all daily living tasks. It was like somebody pressed a button and that's what was recorded and that's what came out. And I point this out because even in the words, she's nonverbal and non-mobile, I'm describing her from a lens of lack. I'm describing her based on what she isn't. And the reason that I'm gentle with myself around it is because we live in a world And in a culture where the ideal is typical, the ideal is neurotypical, and it is everywhere. It's in our school systems, it's in the medical system, it's everywhere. So we're like climbing an uphill battle in trying to accept that our children are perfect exactly as they are, and there is nothing to fix. Because everything around us, when we go to the doctor and they're being measured on certain scales and tests, that it's all around us where we can only see how our children are deficient, right? What they are lacking. And this goes for all of our kids, right? It's so easy to see what they are not, because that is the culture in which we are living. So I want to invite you and encourage you to step out of that box and to question, maybe the ideal isn't typical, right? Our children, despite, and again, I don't want to belittle the complications and the challenges and how exhausting it is, and how there are so many things that perhaps we can't do as families, and the things that we can't do, the things that are different from what we imagined in the first place. And I'll be the first to tell you that even at the age of 21, I still have little pangs when I realize, or something happens, whether it's a life cycle event or whether it's something that I realize our family can't do, or that fantasy that, you know, is what I thought our family would be like. It doesn't ever totally go away, but it takes less and less space when I learn to accept what family we are and what our family does look like, and embrace the lessons and my own awakening as a person, and acceptance of myself, and embracing of myself as a whole, complete being, exactly as I am. I don't think I could be there without Mira in my world. So if we can just get rid of this idea, and this, I mean, this is like lifetime of work where our culture, the problem lies in the way that others see us and see our children. And we can begin one step at a time to see them as complete beings, and how incredible it is to step into their world. And that, but I want you to hear that I'm not saying that it's easy. And I'm not saying that that deletes any difficulty and challenges, especially if we're single parents, right? It is exhausting, it is draining. So even more so, we have to find the ways to take care of ourselves. But that, again, doesn't mean that you have to be able to go on trips and you have to go for massage. It means that we have to start treating ourselves with kindness and respect in ways that we are whole and deserving. So any thoughts or questions there before I keep going? Okay. So let me talk a little bit about expectations. Let's see, I've addressed our energy. Yeah. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about expectations. Expectations from a psychological point of view are just a really funny thing. We all have them. We have expectations on the childcare professionals that live with us. We have expectations of spouses and partners. We have expectations of our children, and we have huge expectations of ourselves. And what we know, if you think about our expectations, is that if our kids, our partners, our childcare professionals fill those expectations, we're like, well, great, that's what I expect of you. There's no fanfare, there's no excitement. It's just like, well, yeah, that's what I expect. And if they don't fill those expectations, what is it? Let me just type in the chat for a second. If people don't fulfill our expectations of them, or if we don't fill the expectations for ourselves, what happens? What do we end up feeling inside? Just type in the chat. Disappointment. Yes. Disappointment. Frustration, anger. Yeah. I know for me, mine was like, yes, I feel like a failure. Feeling less than. Rejected. What about resentment, insecurity, resentment? Yes, I told you to, and you didn't. So expectations are, they're probably the biggest stumbling block to us feeling compassion for ourselves, compassion for others, and just accepting ourselves. And I will say that naturally, I think we as human beings have a tendency to not want to follow expectations. We don't necessarily, we have like those, we are not wanting to fill expectations that others have of us. And you see what happens when we don't fulfill them. We just feel resentment. So I see that as expectations can be toxic, right? It's like we put the expectations out there. If they're fulfilled, great, because we expect them to. And if they're not fulfilled, whether it's by us or others, it leads to feeling like a failure, anger, frustration. And that frustration and resentment, it not only leaves us and goes towards those around us, but they're like a boomerang, and they come back and they actually create greater disturbance within us. And not in a way of just saying like, okay, well, that sucks, but in true ways that it settles within us and can settle within us as disease, right? It creates dis-ease and therefore has the possibility of creating within us disease. And we know that that is the last thing that we need when we have the challenge of raising kids who have greater and unique needs. And so we can move from expectations into agreements. And that may be a whole nother conversation, but what I want you to hear is the toxicity of having expectations, and know that what we do when we have them and how toxic the result can be. But we can enter agreements. We can enter agreements with our kids. We can enter agreements with our spouses and partners. We can enter agreements with ourselves, and we can enter agreements with the childcare professionals who are living in our house. And I would love to go into that, but I don't know if we have much time to go into agreements. So much more than that, except that it is a back and forth and something that you work on together with the other person, right? And it's tricky because we can work on agreements that end up sounding a lot like expectations, but it is an agreement. Like if I were to say to my older son years ago, hey, there's laundry in this basket and it's been sitting there for days. When do you think you can empty it? And if he says to me, I'll do it as soon as I'm done with my homework, or I'll do it tomorrow, or I'll do it by the end of the weekend. If it's an expectation, I could say, great, I expect this to be done by the weekend. And I guarantee you, he's not going to want to do it. If I say to him, so we're agreeing, so are we entering agreement? You're willing to empty the laundry basket by the end of the weekend. Is that what I'm hearing you say? And he says, yes, I'm willing to do this by the end of the weekend. And I say, great. That's an agreement. So we have an agreement. You're going to do that. And if it doesn't happen, then we go back to, hey, you said you were going to do this and it didn't happen. What got in the way? And we continue to work with that rather than resentment. And we then enter this world of projections onto our kids.
Cindy, can I ask a quick question about that? I think this is really interesting and very relevant to all of us who are parents in general, and then for our host parents, especially. Expectations are such a big thing. What would you say is the difference in your mind between expectations and agreements? And how can we turn expectations into agreements? How do we navigate that change?
Yeah. So I would say the difference between an expectation and an agreement is coming from the expectation is often what we want someone to do for us. Mm-hmm. And there's disappointment that follows if it doesn't happen. And it leads to us projecting onto them and creating all these stories as to why that didn't happen, right? Whether it's a story about us, I'm a failure, I can't even meet my own expectation, or whether somebody didn't do that because they're being nasty or they're not wanting to help. I like to work from the premise that everybody, whether it's our kids, partner, we're all doing the best we can and we all want to be successful.
Mhm.
And I think when we bring in, so an agreement is more neutral, right? It states something that needs to be done and that we're both willing to find a way to make it happen. But an expectation is something sort of out in the ether that we expect, and then it leads to disappointment if it doesn't happen. Where an agreement, if it doesn't happen, let it lead to curiosity and say, huh, I wonder why that didn't happen. And it allows us to have this back and forth dialogue and understanding. And I think especially for those of you who are host parents, when we bring a childcare professional into our house, oh my gosh, like what are some, I know I had huge expectations. Like I think I was expecting, and I was set up, our very first person who we had, not through Apex, but literally was like a Mary Poppins. And that set the bar really high for us. But I think, and then I was expecting that.
Mhm.
And I think when we are at our wits' end, or we're willing to ask for help and we're willing to receive someone coming into our house, the expectations we have for what that's going to look like are huge. And so in the same way that when we receive a diagnosis for our kid, or when something is recognized from birth, or when we see that they're not the child we thought they were going to be, it's a disappointment in our fantasy, right? It's all the fantasy that didn't come true. So it's not that something is wrong, but it's the fantasy didn't happen. And so when we end up grieving, so much of what we are grieving is the fantasy. And that can happen when we bring a child care professional into our house too, right? That they are somehow, even if it's unconscious, what we expect them to be able to do in taking care of us, and that they should somehow know. And when it doesn't happen, then in the same way, it leads to resentment. And if we have a child care professional in our house and we're feeling resentful because we want them to just understand and do something, they're going back to what I said earlier about our energy, and that our kids pick up on that, the child care professionals pick up on that. And so they're going to move further and further away and not want to connect. And so so maybe this is a moment to just share a little bit about what I found to be the most helpful in working with childcare professionals in our house, and as well as what I think can be so helpful if you have them right now, is looking at not only what is going well, but first and foremost, to not expect them to rescue you, because that's an inside job. Going back to success from the inside out, we are the only ones who can do that. And so to know what we need to, in the ways that we need to care for ourselves, has to happen before we can ask anybody on the outside to help us. And this happens in marriages too, right? We expect the other person to take care of us in the ways that we are in the most need. And that is an unfair expectation. The beauty in realizing that, though, is that then we recognize that it is within our power to give ourselves what we truly need. And that's going to lead me into what we can do with our childcare professionals too. And that is to begin to have first compassion for ourselves. We know damn well that we are doing the best that we can do. And I say that knowing that still to this day, I'm working on, but I know that this is my issue to work on, the feeling of guilt of not being enough for, and I'll just specifically for my daughter. Have I done enough? Am I doing enough? Would she be needing surgery if I had done more, ... Would she have physical contractures if I had done more of ... Would she be verbal if I had spent more time going to more appointments ... It's not helpful. And not only is it not helpful, it's toxic for me and it's toxic for my daughter. And so, and all of that fell into this idea of who I thought I needed to be for her. And I remember hearing from one mother years ago, she just needs me to be her mom. And so those of you who have invited a childcare professional to live with you know that that alone is huge, because it's an incredible opportunity to allow more of a community to take care of your child and to share the responsibility. But then we also have to work with that person and see their own strengths and what they're bringing. And I know that I used to get caught up into it, but they're not doing it the way that I want to. Right? And that's fair, but know that about yourself, and then really take the time to think, is this the way it really needs to be? Like, who is it that my daughter or my child really needs? And in what way do they need it? I know for me, letting go of control of it being done certain ways was huge. So what I would say in terms of some of the biggest qualities in fostering a healthy relationship, and this goes for showing our partners this, for ourselves, for our childcare professionals, and our kids, is looking at and really focusing on the things that we admire and the things that we acknowledge, little to large, and share them with our kids, with our childcare professionals, and with ourselves. So literally appreciating ourselves. Like, if you want to take an exercise away from this, see if you can, at the end of this call, tonight before you go to bed, write down 3 things that you appreciate about yourself, and know that what we focus on grows. So if we can begin to point out to our childcare professionals something that they did that we acknowledge, something they did that we admire, like just today, because it's really easy to skip over that and not do that. And so today I have my daughter's caregiver at the hospital with her for the afternoon, because my husband is working and I'm here doing this. And there are doctors coming in and out, and I can berate myself, feeling like I should be the one who's there. Are they going to judge me for not being there? She's texting me with what is happening at the hospital and the feeding team and all of this. I just took the time to say how grateful I am that she is there, and how much I admire her willingness to step up and be there. And I do that, one, because it allows me to actually deeply appreciate her, but also I know full well that if she feels that I am seeing her, and that's what this really comes down to, the admiration and appreciation. And it makes the difference with our kids, because it's so different than telling them we're proud of them or just thanking them, that when we can point out what we see, both from admiration and from acknowledgement and appreciation, it's like it's shining a light on them that they can own, and that they get that we are seeing them. So when I say to her, I really acknowledge and admire you being willing to be with her in the hospital and take on having conversations with the specialists, and that she then knows that I am trusting her, and that alone will feed her in a way that makes her show up in an even bigger way, or may help her to even go above and beyond what she does in a typical day. And I know that from the way that when I'm coaching parents and I ask them to look and acknowledge those things that we can admire and acknowledge in our kids, it's different, because if we talk about what we are proud of in them, it's about us. And they continually see that what they do in their lives is about us and needing to please us. Whereas when we say and show them what we admire about them and what we acknowledge, and the difference being that admiring has more to do with a quality that we're seeing in them, and acknowledging is something that perhaps they have done. Like, hey, I want to acknowledge how you got through that moment without screaming, or I want to acknowledge how you picked up your toys today after school or after you were done playing with them, or hey, I want to acknowledge how you were able to sit through that meal, or hey, I really admire how you were kind to your sibling today. The difference is that they see that as, wow, yeah, that's a part of me, and you're acknowledging it and you see it. And that is what feeds and nourishes anybody's sense of self. And we can do the same thing for ourselves. We can admire a way that we showed up. We can acknowledge something that we did, and we can appreciate ourselves. Because looking at our negative self-talk is one of the most harmful things. So let me pause. It's 2:45 at the moment. Let me stop and just take any questions or thoughts that anybody has. Sarah, are you seeing questions?
I do have a couple that haven't been put in the public chat. So one is very timely. What you were just talking about, I think is huge. I know for myself as a mom, it can be so easy for me to go down the guilt trip train and all the negativity in my mind about myself. And that's where it starts. And then I start spewing the negativity to the family members or the people who are supposed to be helping me. But it really does start with myself. And I don't realize that sometimes. So I appreciate you pointing that out, that we have to start with 3 things we appreciate about ourselves to get get the train going. But one of the questions we received, I loved. So what can I do and how can I direct my thoughts to be more productive? How much time can I spend on critical thinking or negativity without it getting toxic? Have any tips on that?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, I think when we're critical of ourselves, I love this phrase, and I use it 500 times a day, is 3 words. And that is that it's so understandable. Meaning, of course, we're critical of ourselves because people have been critical of us, right? And when people have been critical of us, whether it's our own parent, whether it's someone at school, when we were kids, knowing that when we came into the world, we were not critical of ourselves, right? We asked for what we wanted in the way that we knew how. We didn't question ourselves. We didn't judge ourselves. All of that crap is stuff that we have taken on from other people. So when we are judging ourselves, the first thing is it's so understandable. And ideally, and I don't have time to go into this, but when I'm working with clients, we begin to unpack where that comes from. And then understanding literally, like, yes, we look like adults here in this room, right in this Zoom chat. We are adults, and we are, living in bodies that are adults, but we are still that 3-year-old, that 5-year-old, that 6-year-old little child with us, and we carry that child with us daily. And it's that little child that is feeling judged and is getting reactive when we get triggered on the outside. And so the beauty in that is that we as our adult selves have the ability to reparent ourselves and be kind to ourselves in the ways that we need it most.
That's really great.
Any critical thinking, first, like, just know that, yeah, of course, I'm being critical of myself. It's so understandable, but know that it is not you. It is not you at your core. That great. It is a message that you have taken on.
I'm going to take away that very practical tip about the 3 things I appreciate about myself, and really writing those down and getting myself in a different frame of mind. So I really appreciate that practical tip. Another question we had that I thought, you might have some more practical advice about is, someone asked, how do you take a break when you have no break? And when you're working all the time? And I think that's very real for all parents, but especially parents parenting extra needs. it doesn't feel like there's a break, but you know, what you did at the beginning of this call felt like a break to me, and it was very brief, but it was so refreshing. Do you have any other tips like that or things that you've done to refresh yourself?
Yeah. So, I mean, that was actually the reason why I did that at the beginning,
That's
because
wonderful.
yes, sometimes there actually isn't a break, but I think we also have to kind of question, is that really true? Right? And who's telling you that there's no break? Right? Is it truly coming? And I'm not belittling that, but is there that break? It may not be able to happen outside yourself, but you can take a break inside yourself. And that's where just taking literally 1 minute to close your eyes and take a breath or go into another room can bring you back to center. There are several things I can suggest, and I will suggest some others of things that you can do when there's no taking a break. But I don't believe there is any single one that is as powerful as tuning into your breath. And there are other things, you know, one of the things that I do at this time of year, and it's not necessarily taking a break, but it's a way of nourishing myself. When it starts getting dark at 4 o'clock, I want to go to bed, and I can't, right? We still have to eat dinner and no one else is going to bed yet. And I can't go to bed. And there are days that I'm running nonstop. And you know, everything from calling doctors, getting medicine, refilling medications, researching, I've been working on trying to get Mira a new wheelchair and dealing with her physical therapist and the company literally since last March. Like just the things that I know that we as parents have to follow through and we can't let go of. And it feels like there's no break. My first question I ask myself is that really true? Is that really true that I can't take a break right now? Is it really true that I can't go step outside and look at the stars? Is it really true that I can't take the dogs for a walk right now? Is it really true that I can't just even go take a 10-minute bath? Or is it that I'm not willing to because I feel like I'm not enough if I don't?
Wow.
Right? I am a victim. I will be very honest that I am a victim of the world of busyness. And so I notice for myself, and this is a pattern that keeps coming up, is that if I allow myself not to be busy and not to be doing things, I feel like I'm like skipping 5,000 steps here, going to a place of like, I'm not good enough. Right. And we live in a culture where our worth is dependent on how much we get accomplished. And I'm so over that. Right. And yet I still am challenged by really, if someone comes down and sees me watching TV, which doesn't happen very often in my house, I feel like I have to I have to justify it. So, but I got off tangent. One of the things that I do when I'm wanting to go to bed at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when it gets dark, I bought a big, huge candle with like 3 wicks in it, and I light it on the dining room table when it gets dark or when I'm starting to make dinner. And somehow I find that incredibly nourishing. So it's not a break, but it's something that literally just seeing the flicker of a candle flame gives me a sense of lightness, or it reminds me of, you know, sort of, it just gives me an internal light when the darkness is all around me. So use that as a metaphor, if you will. But I think this culture of being busy is something that we all are victims of. And so that taking a break, it may not be, you may not have an hour, but might you have 2 minutes? Even if, you know, in an extreme situation where your kid is flying off the handle, throwing things, can you just go to another room for 2 minutes and come back? Or can you take a break mentally? Can you take a break? And in this format, I don't know, I can't speak to you exactly to know exactly what you're talking about, but can that break be, I don't have to, this is not for me to fix. Can that break be, can I give myself a break in the expectation that I'm setting for myself?
Wow, that's awesome.
Does that answer the question? Does that help?
For me? It's really, really helpful.
So that break can be a physical break. The break can be your breath and moving and just stepping outside, but that break can also be, can I give myself a break?
Right.
Can I give myself a break in who I think I need to be?
Absolutely. I really, connect with that and I think it's really important that we ask ourselves, is that really true? Or am I just telling myself that? And I think as, like you said, in our culture, in our society, we tell ourselves a lot of things and we have a lot of expectations that, that we need to identify. So I really appreciate that. That's great. So one more question we had was around creating boundaries, which you've already talked about. And this person said, going through a year of huge change, how do you create clear and appropriate boundaries for all members of the family and the caregiver and thrive through a year of huge change? So I loved your description between, differentiation between expectations and agreements. But if you think back to having a care professional there throughout the week, something that I know we bump into a lot is that, oh, they're there all the time. And we think they know, right? And we do that with our spouses, with our kids, with our caregiver. I think that we have telepathy. They should know what I'm thinking, right? So what did you find was most important as a parent of setting those expectations up front, but then ongoing throughout the year to really be successful?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. Also, because a boundary is very different than an expectation. And I would say first to whoever is asking that question of the year of change, especially in a year of big change, please be gentle on yourself and grab as much self-compassion as you possibly can. And I see boundaries less about setting a boundary for another, but setting a boundary for yourself. Being able to set a boundary is in stepping into big time, stepping into your worthiness and setting a boundary for you, because I see a boundary as I deserve and want this for myself. So I'm going to hold a boundary. Therefore, in one sense, and I will share a beautiful example of this that I had with a childcare professional years ago. But just as an example, a boundary with a teenager who's yelling at you or speaking to you in a way that you're like ready to scream, to say, so rather than a boundary of saying, you can't speak to me that way, a boundary sounds more like, hey, I get that you're really upset about this and you want to keep talking about this and this feels really unfair. I'm willing to speak to you about it, but I can't speak to you about this when you're screaming at me. So when we can find another way to talk, I'm willing to listen. I absolutely want to have this conversation with you, but I can't do it when you're screaming at me. That's a boundary. And that's a boundary that is a great role model for what we may want with our kids, and them having boundaries for themselves and just saying, you know what, this doesn't feel good for me. So I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. It's not about you can't do that for me and expect that person to hold it. Right. But in my previous home, the way that the childcare professional would enter and leave the house, they always had to pass me if I was sitting in my dining room. And I get it. When I said at the beginning, like, it's an amazing thing to have someone living with you. And it's not easy because you have someone living with you and they're in your space. And that's also hard. And I too felt like, oh my God, I'm working at the dining room table. Do they not get that I'm working? This is not the time to ask me questions. Why can't they just come and go and not say anything to me? Do they not see that I'm working? And so I'll offer this. So one thing, and this isn't so much crazy, but like, own your crazy, like own the parts of yourself that may be a little crazy. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier, and she has a thing when, if she's in a meeting and someone's tapping a pencil, it drives her bananas. And so she could either be annoyed at the person tapping the pencil. I'll get back to my issue with a childcare professional in a second. Or she can say, you know what? I have a really hard time hearing what you're saying when there's tapping of the pencil. It's my issue. I can't pay attention to what's being said when there's this external noise of the pencil. It's my thing. So I know for me, if I had an issue of for me, I hate it when people wash the dishes, but leave food in the sink. And so like, I'll come down in the morning and there's food from the dishes that have been left in the sink, even if the dishes were put away. I can own that. And so if I'm dealing with someone, especially who's living in my house for a temporary period of time, to say, please humor me. This is something that drives me crazy. This is not about you. This is about me. It's not going to bother every person. It drives me crazy when food is left in the sink. So then I can ask, are you willing, if you're doing dishes, would you be willing to just try to remember to get the food down? That's
make an agreement about it then.
Make an agreement. Exactly. But so what I had to do with the person who would come and go and speak to me, even though I was trying to work, is I just said in a similar way, I would sort of set up the parameters. This is hard. The way that our house is laid out, there is no way for me to be closed in an office when I'm working unless I'm in the basement. And sometimes I want to work upstairs. So I think at times I said, so if you see me on my computer at the table and you're coming and going, I'm going to ask that you just assume that I'm working. And so I'm just going to ask, would you be willing to pass me without interrupt? If I'm here, just imagine I have a glass door around me and I'm not wanting to be interrupted. And if you have something to ask or say, please shoot me a text. Or tonight when I'm blah, 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 I so want to hear what you have to say. And I want to hear your questions or anything else that's going on for you. I really do. But when I'm working at the table, I'm not in a place that I can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
That's holding a boundary. That's setting a boundary. I can't hear it. And I want to hear what you have to say. Or saying other boundaries that we had set up was that we wanted as a family to sometimes have dinners without the person living with us.
Sure.
And so rather than her just, me saying, oh my God, why does she have to have dinner with us every night? Right. Then I get resentful. Right. Then I'm projecting on her. Why doesn't she get it? Why can't she blah, blah, blah. Now it feels like another thing that I have to do because that resentment she's going to feel and it's toxic for me. So then we say, hey, you know what? As a family, I think we're feeling like we would love to have a couple of nights that we just have dinner as a family. So how would that work for you? Obviously, you still need to come up and have dinner. What can we do so that you still are getting dinner and we get to have some time as a family and work together, right? So that, do you have any ideas? And maybe that person says, he or she, yeah, I mean, if you guys don't mind, if I come up to the kitchen, if you're okay with me eating in my room a couple of nights a week, I'm fine with that. Right. Or, if you're okay with me eating later, then is it okay if I come up and eat after you guys have eaten dinner? So it's about you. It's not what they need to do, but it's about we as a family, we want you to join us for a few nights a week. And we also want a couple nights that we just have dinner with us. Mm-hmm. So I get that you also need dinner. What would work for you? Right. So that was a very real example that we had. So I hope that resonates with them.
That's a really good example and something I think is very relatable in terms of setting boundaries and going into a time of the year that can be a little tricky and setting appropriate boundaries around the holidays. So that's a really good example to think about. How do I make this not just about you and setting an expectation, but really just something that this is what works for me, and can we agree on this?
Yeah. And Sarah, you and I had spoken about too, just how important it is. And as the holidays come up too, I think it's a perfect example, whether it's weekly meetings that are so important because then things they don't build up, but being able to say to that person, hey, you know what, the holidays are coming. And I know they can bring up a lot of issues and it can be a really emotional time of year. And we really want this to feel good for you and for us. So let's talk about what do we each need? What do you need for yourself at this time? How can we be there for you? And I also want to get clear on what we need for us and how we can make this work for everybody, because you all know, holidays are filled with expectations. And then if we're with our own family, the expectations run so high. And so it is a beautiful time to really check in about what you each need from one another
And checking our breath. I think that I'm going to bring that into the holidays with me, because you're right. They are full of expectations. And I love that you created this topic about starting with our inside. And I think that's really key for me. And something I'm going to take away is that it's starting with me, creating calm inside of me so that I can show up great for the people that I need to create agreements with. So thank you so much, Cindy. It's wonderful.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Wonderful to hear from you, your deep experience, and also all these really practical ideas that I'm going to take away. And we are going to partner with Cindy to get together some resources about, kind of tips for creating that success personally for ourselves, and then as a parent, and then also creating success with our caregivers. So thank you so much for sharing all of your ideas. And I do want to, can we drop your book into the chat for everyone? Cindy,
of course. Of course. How do you want me to type it?
Let's see. I think maybe Nicole, can you pop it in the chat for us?
Hold it up. I have one here.
Yes, I have my own copy here. It's really a wonderful, wonderful read.
You can order it on any online retailer, but you're also a retailer, but you can also get it at a local bookstore. You just have to ask for them to order it.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And it just in the last, before people hang up too, if anyone's willing to just write anything that you are taking away, thank you for sharing what you're taking, Sarah. And if anybody else wants to just a word, a sentence, 3 words of what you're leaving with, that'd be great.
Yes, that would be wonderful. If you could just take even a word or a tip or just a thought, an intention that you're going to walk away with and take with you into your daily life, that would be wonderful. I know it helps me when I say it out loud sometimes to make sure that I really take that thing and get it, internally, because the world does, our lives move so fast, and it is so important for us to take that moment. Man, I'm going to start a lot more of my days with checking my breath. So thanks for that example too.
And Jane, I love that you're saying to not be perfect. Be perfect to you. Yes, absolutely. And there is such beauty in the messy. And I'll say, one of the things that my daughter loves more than anything, what makes her laugh, is when people are messy, when they can't figure something out, when they can't figure out how to get the computer to work, or a TV show, or they drop something or something breaks, she laughs hysterically. And I think it's just so perfect in what connects her is our messiness. So I love that. Being perfectly you.
I love it. That's great.
You are enough. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, great. And in terms of the agreements and expectations, like if anyone has any questions about that, do not hesitate to reach out to me. You can email me with any questions that come up, or as you leave from this today, if there's confusion or you have a question, please email me. I promise I will get back to you. Because I threw that out there, but making agreements without expectations in it is easier said than done. So, anyway.
Wonderful. That'll be great. Yeah, we'll include Cindy's email, her contact information, and also her website. She is a parent coach, and we'll link that in our follow-up resources. And really so glad that you guys could all join us today, and we will make the recording available for those who had requested that. Let's see, Ellie has asked, one of my host moms asked me exactly what you said about how to convey to her CP that they sometimes would like to have family dinners. Oh, good. Yeah, a very relatable example.
Yeah, right. And that if we just expect them to get it, how toxic that can be.
Yeah.
Right. And then imagine what they feel like at the dinner table when you don't want them there.
Totally. Wonderful. Well, I wish everybody a great rest of the day. Thank you again, Cindy. And
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, we'll send out some follow-up resources and we'll be in touch. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Cindy.
My pleasure. Thank you.